There is a particular kind of silence that falls over an American factory floor when engineers stop arguing about horsepower and start arguing about identity. That silence happened here, because the question was never whether Chevrolet could make the Grand Sport faster. The question was whether it could still feel like a Grand Sport once they did. I'm with Premium Automotive Reviews, and we exist for exactly this kind of question. The ones that live underneath the spec sheet, in the space between what a car does and what it means to the person behind the wheel. And before we get into the numbers, I want to tell you about a decision buried inside this car's engineering that a lot of purists are going to argue about the moment they hear it. A decision involving where the power actually gets sent to the pavement, and why Chevrolet may have just redefined what Grand Sport is allowed to mean. Start with the way it sits. This isn't a car that announces itself through exaggeration. The proportions are wider than the standard Corvette lineup, a stance built from a wide-body architecture reportedly stretched several inches beyond the base car, and every inch of that width exists for a reason beyond drama. It's about contact patch. It's about confidence at speed. The fenders swell outward like muscle under tension. Not for show, but because there is something underneath demanding the room. The face is sharper now, more resolved. The headlight signature cutting a thin blade of daytime running light across a hood that breathes through functional vents rather than decorative ones. Chevrolet design language has always walked a line between aggression and elegance, and this car leans into elegance first, letting the aggression reveal itself only when you look closer. In the way the front splitter kisses the road, in the way the greenhouse tapers toward a tail that refuses to be loud about its own downforce. The wheels deserve their own mention. 20 inches up front, 21 out back, staggered specifically to load the rear axle with grip the moment the throttle opens. That's not an aesthetic choice. That's a chassis engineer's fingerprint left in plain sight. Underneath that bodywork sits the part of the story most people expected, and the part they didn't. The heart of the standard Grand Sport is a naturally aspirated 6.7-liter V8, a new generation of pushrod architecture that Chevrolet has quietly refined rather than reinvented, targeting output in the neighborhood of 535 horsepower and roughly 520 pound-feet of torque. That's meaningful, honest power, the kind that doesn't need artificial urgency, because it comes from displacement and breathing, not desperation. But here's the part that will start arguments in comment sections everywhere. Chevrolet is reportedly offering a Grand Sport X variant, one that pairs that same combustion architecture with a front electric motor in an all-wheel drive layout, pushing combined output toward the 720 horsepower range. For a nameplate built on rear-wheel drive purity, on the idea that a Corvette talks to you through its back tires first, adding electrified all-wheel drive is either heresy or evolution, depending on who you ask. I'll let you form your own opinion, because there are real arguments on both sides. Now close your eyes for a second, because this is where the car stops being a concept and starts being an experience. Twist the start sequence, and there's a half-second of mechanical anticipation before the V8 catches, a low compression bark that settles almost immediately into a idle with just enough lope to remind you this is still a pushrod engine wearing a modern suit. At idle it murmurs, patient, almost polite. Roll into the throttle and that politeness disappears fast, replaced by a rising, layered growl that thickens as the revs climb, less violent than a supercharged muscle car, more athletic, more precise. The exhaust note through the quad outlets carries genuine texture, a rasp underneath the roar that changes character depending on load. Upshifts through the dual-clutch transmission land with a crisp mechanical certainty, felt through the seat as much as heard. And when you finally isolate the cabin from all of it, dropping back to a cruise, the silence returns almost instantly. Engineered isolation doing its job so well that the outside world simply fades until you ask for it back. Open the door, and the first thing you notice isn't a feature, it's a feeling. The seat accepts you low and centered, the kind of driving position that feels less like sitting in a car and more like becoming part of its skeleton. The steering wheel is thick without being clumsy, wrapped in leather that carries just enough texture to remind your hands they're doing something important. Red stitching threads through black leather and carbon fiber trim with a restraint that feels intentional, rather than decorative. And there's a faint scent of new leather and warmed metal that automotive people know intimately, and civilians never quite forget once they've smelled it. The digital cluster sits close to the driver, angled slightly inward. Information delivered without demanding attention it hasn't earned. A vertical strip of climate controls runs down the center stack, tactile and immediate, refusing to bury basic functions inside a touchscreen the way so many modern interiors insist on doing. That's a small thing. It matters enormously the first time you're changing lanes and adjusting temperature at the same time. Technology here exists to disappear into the background of your life, rather than demand a starring role. Adaptive cruise systems, lane centering assistance, and over-the-air update capability are present because they should be, quietly extending the car's competence without turning the driving experience into something managed by a computer. The infotainment system connects to your life the way a good assistant does, present when needed, invisible when not. The first few miles tell you everything. Steering weight builds naturally as speed increases, communicating road texture with a clarity that feels almost old-fashioned in the best possible way. Throttle response is immediate but not nervous, the kind of calibration that trusts the driver's right foot rather than second-guessing it. Braking is confident and progressive, the initial bite firm enough to inspire trust without feeling grabby. Through a series of tightening corners, the chassis settles into a balance that feels genuinely neutral, weight transferring predictably rather than violently, the suspension reading broken pavement and relaying just enough information to keep you engaged without beating you up. There's a moment somewhere around the third corner of a proper mountain road where the car stops feeling like a machine you're operating and starts feeling like an extension of intention itself. Reportedly, pricing for the standard Grand Sport is expected to start just under $100,000, with the electrified Grand Sport X variant projected to land closer to $112,000. That number puts real weight on the question of value, and here's the honest answer. You're not just paying for horsepower figures that competitors can match or beat. You're paying for 6 decades of a nameplate that has meant something to American driving culture. For engineering restraint in an era that often rewards excess. For a car that still asks something of the person driving it, rather than doing everything for them. Whether that's worth it depends entirely on what you value in a driving experience, and that's not something a spec sheet can answer for you. Where does this car actually sit in the landscape? It isn't chasing exotic supercar territory, and it isn't pretending to be one. It occupies a strange and increasingly rare position, an American sports car willing to offer genuine electrified performance without abandoning the mechanical honesty that built its reputation. Call it a bridge car, one foot planted firmly in Corvette heritage, the other stepping cautiously into a future the brand can't avoid. This car was built for the person who still enjoys the mechanical act of driving, who feels something when an engine note changes under load, who wants performance that requires skill to unlock rather than simply appearing on demand. It's for someone who respects engineering history enough to notice when a company is trying to honor it rather than erase it, and who understands that real driving satisfaction often comes from tension, not ease. It isn't without compromise. That electrified all-wheel drive system, however capable, adds weight and complexity that purists will point to as a departure from the stripped-down mechanical honesty the Grand Sport name once represented, and Chevrolet knows it, which is exactly why the naturally aspirated rear-wheel drive version still exists as the philosophical anchor of the lineup. There's a stretch of empty desert highway somewhere outside a city that never quite goes to sleep. Heat shimmering off asphalt in the early evening. No traffic, no rules beyond the ones physics insists on. That's where this car makes emotional sense, where the engine note has room to unfold, and the chassis has room to prove what it's capable of, far from anything asking it to compromise. Before we wrap up, subscribe to Premium Automotive Reviews if stories like this one matter to you, and drop your honest opinion in the comments. Should an American performance icon built on rear-wheel drive purity embrace electrified all-wheel drive to stay competitive? Or does that trade away exactly what made it special in the first place? I want to hear both sides. The 2027 Grand Sport isn't trying to be everything. It's trying to be honest about what a Corvette still means, even as the road ahead changes underneath it. This information reflects current industry insight, engineering trends, and unofficial projections based on available reporting, and should be considered speculative rather than confirmed. Specifications, pricing, technology, and design details are subject to change and have not been officially verified by the manufacturer. Viewers should consult official manufacturer announcements for confirmed details before drawing final conclusions about this vehicle.